Oh, Lord have mercy. Let me know if you can hear me. I want to welcome you to the last episode that I will ever do of After Hours Live on StreamYard. Yes, I have officially decided I'm changing platforms because once again tonight it gave me issues with LinkedIn again, and I'm just not going to deal with that. I'm done with StreamYard. So starting next week, it will be on a different platform. So there we go. How's everybody doing tonight? Welcome to the Thursday night after hours live. Oh, I got to do this on here. I got to record this for TikTok. Are you on TikTok? You're not? You should be. You should be on TikTok. Get on there. Look me up. Send a friend request. I get more traction on TikTok than I do on any other platform. So you should be on TikTok. You absolutely should. And we also, there we go. We also have a winner for the toner and probe. The winner is, drum roll please, Jay Caldwell of Osborne Engineering. I shot you an email today. You have exactly 48 hours to give me your email address. If you don't give it to me, I'm going to pick another winner. So you have what today's Thursday night, Friday night. I will give you until Saturday night, Sunday morning. If you haven't notified me by Sunday morning, Jay Caldwell of Osborne Engineering, I'm going to give it away to somebody else. Because when I shot you an email, hello, Mark. When I shot you an email, I bounced back and said it wasn't right. So why would you sign up for a contest and put in the wrong email address? I don't know. But, hey, I got fat fingers. Sometimes that happens to me. Sometimes I inadvertently type the wrong thing. So there you go. So, we always start off every after hours live stream with, what are you drinking? So I'm finishing off this drink, which is my normal Zevia root beer water mix. But when I finish with that, in the backup, I got a LaCroix waiting. LaCroix is not a sponsor, but if they want to be a sponsor, I'll take them. I'll take them as a sponsor. Absolutely will take them as a sponsor. And yes, that very good, George. That's pretty smart of you. That is a cable tester in the background, right next to my Let's Talk Cabling screen. I've got a couple shows that I'm working on. I'm working on, does stapling actually affect the cable? And I need a cable tester to do that. I got another one. I'm going to do a patch cord shoot off. Is the patch cord from Home Depot or Lowe's as good as the one from Amazon? Is the one from Amazon as good as that tier 1 manufacturer? We all know who they are, right? Panduit, Leviton, Systemax. Is it as good as those? So I'm going to do a patch cord shoot off as well. And I need a cable tester for that. And maybe I might bring in Steve Cowell to help me decipher those test results and tell me which is going to be the good one, right? So Mark said he is drinking water. Very good. That's probably a wise decision while you're drinking on your commute home, Mr. Mark. Shotzi is drinking Dr. Pepper as usual. I certainly missed you on Tuesday night in our after hours, in our TDM study group there, Shotzi. I kind of missed doing that. But let me turn off that banner. I don't know why that banner's still going. I need an assistant. And she actually said she would do it, but she's not feeling too good tonight. So Mark asked me, what tester will I be using? I will be using the AEM Test Pro tester to test that and certify it. And just to kind of see exactly the performance levels of those different things. I got other ideas that require testers as well. So I'm really excited about using that stuff. So moving on with the show, what the next step is coming. You've been on this show more than once. The next step is the Acronym Challenge. What does RFP stand for? What does RFP stand for? I'll give you a hint. It has something to do with estimating. RFP. While we're here, I got to do my public service announcements, right? Help control the population of acronyms. Have your acronym spayed or neutered. We have enough of them. Speaking of spayed or neutered, our puppy got spayed yesterday, so she is recovering from her surgery. So you might see her coming back and forth here shortly in her pink camouflage anti-chewater stitch one piece thing. So anybody? Any very good, Shotzi. Request for proposal. RFP stands for request for proposal. Not to be confused with RFQ, request for quote. Request for proposal, request for quote are commonly mistaken for each other, but they are different. Homework assignment number 1 for tonight. Look up RFQ, look up RFP, and then in the comments, tell me what is the difference between RFP and RFQ. That's your homework assignment for tonight. What? There's a homework assignment, Chuck? You didn't tell me there was going to be homework assignments. You know there's going to be homework assignments. Come on. This is the After Hours Live with Ask Chuck Bowser RCDD questions. Of course, I'm going to give you homework assignments. So let's get straight into the heart of the questions. Question number 1. Of course, I got to don my appropriate PPE to make sure that the words don't jump off the page and injure my eyes. This one comes from Jamie in Arizona. And he says, our company has a policy that discussing salary with coworkers could result in termination. Is this legal? First off, let me start off with saying I am not a lawyer. So you want to seek a lawyer for legal advice in your city, your state. Okay. Now, let's talk about why that they would put those in company policies. You have good employers and you have bad employers. Not every employer is a bad employer. Not every employer is a good employer. A good employer is going to offer you fair market value for your skill sets and how well they think you're going to interact with the company and what future potential you have with that company. Now, even though you might be functioning the same role as somebody else, maybe they're having some issues inside and they might not be getting paid as much, or they might have more potential. They might be getting paid more. So the reason they put that in there is because for the poor employers is they don't want you guys talking because it's going to cause strife and it's going to cost them more money. For the good employers, it doesn't matter. They're going to pay you for what you're worth. That's one of the things I loved about unions, right? With a union, you assigned a certain tier and you can look at the contract and you know exactly how much that hourly rate was for that tier, right? Now, with that being said, companies do put that in their company policies. They say you will be terminated if you discuss salary with other people. That is against federal law. It's actually against the National Labor Relations Act. So that's actually a violation of federal law. It may also be a violation of state law, but that doesn't stop them from putting it in there. Okay, it does not stop them from putting it in there. And they don't, the reason I want you to do is, again, they don't want you discussing your salary with other coworkers because, again, it causes conflict. And from an employee side, you're thinking, well, they're hiding salary from me because, they got me cheaper than the other one. They don't think I'm worth as much as the other person, but they're just cheap and they don't want to pay me as much as the other person. That may not be the case. With a good employee, that won't be the case. But like I said, there's good employers and there's bad employers out there as well. Now, keep in mind, though, when you start asking other people their salary, remember this. That person might get embarrassed and might not tell you what their actual salary is, right? So, and with that being said, they may inflate their salary. Hello, Fernando. Or they may deflate their salary just for that very reason. So you're basing what you're baking against the other person based on a lie. That's going to cause, again, conflict and stuff like that within the company, right? And if you find out that there's another employee who is making more than you, who has the same job as you, and the same tenure as you, you find out they're making more than you, a lot of times that's going to cause you to have ill feelings towards the company. And it probably should, depending on the circumstances. But here's the problem. You are being paid to do a job, not do that job at 70%, not doing that job at, 60% because you're mad because, you found out some piece of information. You need to do your job to the best of your ability at 110% functionality all times, no matter what, period. 110%. Give that effort. But if you start talking aside with the people, that could affect you. It could also affect them. And that's going to affect their productivity. And the estimates based on how much time it takes to do a task, not based on whether you talk to somebody or not about their salaries. So the best thing to do is during the hiring phase is just negotiate to get the best salary that you can. And if you don't think that salary they're offering you is your fair market value, move on. Go to another company, especially in today's market. Today's market is a employee market. There are companies out there just in dire need of employees. So you just need to move on with that. But don't be mad at the company because you entered into a negotiation. That's all it is. It's a salary negotiation. And you didn't get the upper hand. You found out somebody was a better negotiator than you. Again, still all factors, everybody says all things being equal, and everything's always equal, ever. Right? There's all different kinds of thing that goes in there. 10 years, and let's be honest, also what goes in there as well is how likable you are to the person who actually hired you. Right? And that's also a factor in there. Let's go to question number 2. Question number 2 is from Steve in Maine. Steve says, what is lockout tagout and how can I apply this while terminating fiber? What is lockout tagout? So lockout tagout procedures, basically it's a process or some kind of a working arrangement where you lock out an electrical cable or some kind of a cable or some kind of device so nobody can turn it on or reactivate it while you're working on the other end of the cable because it could potentially injure you or kill you. So lockout tagout procedure, the old-fashioned ones, basically, not the old-fashioned ones, but the electrical ones. So they got like a red triangle with like holes in them. And it's got the two squares. When you close them down, those holes overline over top of each other, and there's a hook that goes into the breaker. It stops you from turning on the breaker. And then you put a padlock through those 2 holes. Now, if there's more than one person working on that electrical device, another person can put on their padlock, another put on their padlock, and they can hold. There's all different kinds. There's ones with 6, there's ones with 10, right? So theoretically, if you get done working with you take off your padlock, but if there's still another padlock on there, nobody can still reactivate it because there's still somebody else working on the other side of that device. That's called lockout tagout procedures. By the way, pro tip number 1 for tonight: if you're doing lockout tagout procedures and you're doing that very kind, like I just mentioned, print out a label with your Brother Systems labeling machine and put your name and your phone number on that lock. So if somebody needs to get a hold of you so they can reactivate it, because let's be honest, what happens sometimes? Sometimes somebody gets busy and they forget to take off their padlock. And that device is off until they can locate whose padlock that is. Because they don't want to cut it off, because they cut it off and turn back the circuit back up. There's a potential for injury because they don't know where it is and who's going to be involved with that. So there's also OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, has some really hefty fines if you don't follow lockout tagout procedures. You can find those in CFR, which is Code of Federal Regulations, I think. Oh, that's a good acronym. I need to put that one in the acronym challenge. CFR 1910.147. If you want to go look them up, there's some huge fines if you don't follow those, because again, it's a potential life safety issue, right? So because it says every company should have a lockout tagout procedure in place, especially when you're working with energized equipment. And again, even technically we're low voltage. Fiber has no voltage on it. But if you look in the unprotected end face with your unprotected eye, you can damage the retina in your eye. So you gotta watch out for that kind of stuff. So let's relate this to fiber. What can you do? Let's say you're terminating a fiber somewhere, or you're servicing a fiber, pre-existing fiber. The one in the 12 strands on the 10th floor, the other end down in the data center. What you could do is you can do it cheaply, off the cuff. You can go buy one of those plastic tackle boxes from Walmart, like the Plano ones. Take it, drill a hole in the side of it, run that fiber cable inside the box, put a loop around it, Velcro it so that way they can't pull it back out. And then put a padlock on that box. And then put a label on the box. Lockout, tag out for access to this end of this fiber. Contact Joe at 813-480, blah, 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 blah. That way they can contact you if they have to activate that fiber. And nobody's going to reactivate that fiber on you. That's one way they can do lockout, tag out with fiber. Let's go to question number 3 for the day. Question number 3. And this one comes from Kelly in Detroit. And Kelly says, when mounting plywood, is a drywall screw acceptable means for supporting that plywood? No. Nope. Don't care. Don't care. Because number one, you're putting a lot of weight, a lot of vertical shear weight on those screws. Because you think it's just hanging plywood, but remember, what if you got a ladder rack screwed to that with cable bundles going in as a ladder rack? What if you got a KSU, which is one of the acronym challenges last week, this week? I don't know. KSU. Look it up if you don't know what it means, right? You can have all kinds of voicemail systems, a whole bunch of weight hanging off that plywood. So drywall screws are not acceptable, period. Not acceptable. So you probably think, well, if they're not acceptable, what do I do? You have a couple of options, and these are in no particular order, right? So the first option is to use galvanized screws. Galvanized screws. Now here's the tip with galvanized screws. Make sure that galvanized screw is a 1/2 inch longer than the thickness of the plywood and the thickness of the gypsum board. So going back to our TDMM study days, remember the plywood should be 3/4 inch AC grade plywood at 3/4 inch, right? If the gypsum board's 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch plus a 1/2 inch gives you 1 1/4 inches. If you got to add a 1/2 inch to that, that means that screw has to be 1 3/4 inches. And you also need to make sure that that screw goes into a stud. Okay. So you can use galvanized screws. Galvanized screws are a little bit more resilient and have more vertical shear strength to them. What's another method? And this one's probably more common than the galvanized screws. Toggle bolts and fender washers. Toggle bolts and fender washers. Now, for those who don't know what fender washer is, it's just a big washer so that when you tighten it down, it bites more of the wood. So there are some things that you need to make sure when you're doing in putting in toggle bolts. Number one, make sure the toggle bolt is at least 1/4 inch in diameter. At least 1/4 inch in diameter. Plus, it's got to be long enough that the screw and the butterfly can go past the plywood and the gypsum board. So using our previous example, remember the plywood's 3/4 inch, the gypsum board's a 1/2 inch, that's 1 1/4. That means that butterfly's got to go past 1 1/4 inch so that butterfly can open up so that when you screw it down, it locks on that board. But there's a fine line here because if you get too long, the screw can actually start digging into the wall on the other side. So there's a fine line there, right? So when you're putting in the toggle bolts, make sure you stay at least 2 inches away from the edges of the plywood, right? And make sure there's no more than 2 feet or 24 inches between those toggle bolts. So you want to go all the way across the top, down the sides, and I would even put a couple of in the center as well, right? When you're putting in those toggle bolts and those fender washers, make sure that you also stay away from the studs because that stud doesn't allow the toggle bolt to open up all the way. So got to watch out for that. Mark says to use snap toggles. Snap toggles. I'm going to have to look that up, Mark. I've never heard of a snap toggle unless I'm not sure what you're talking about. I'm going to have to look those up. Here's pro tip number 2 for the night. If you're putting up plywood, no matter whether you're using the galvanized or the toggle bolts, I always use liquid nails as well. I would put liquid nails on the back of that plywood and then screw it to the wall. And then I knew that way after a day or two and that liquid nails would cure, that plywood was never, ever, ever coming off that wall. Because a lot of times I was working as a cable crew and I didn't know what equipment they're going to be installing on that thing. They could be installing a KSU and a voicemail system like I mentioned earlier. And then all the cable and stuff. That's a lot of weight hanging off of that piece of plywood. So I want to make sure that plywood was not coming anywhere, no matter who or what they put on it, period. Right? So let's go to the next question. Question number 4. And this question comes from another Kelly, but this Kelly is in Alabama. The best barbecue I've ever had was in Alabama, Birmingham, Saul's Barbecue. Loved it. So he asks, we are working on a modular furniture job, and the electricians are installing power poles, also known as utility poles. There is a metal divider that separates the power from our cable. It's a pain to put the cap back on the power pole with the metal divider. So can we just remove that metal divider? Can we leave it out? No, you can't. That metal divider is there for a couple reasons. Number one, it's there because of code. Number two, it's there for performance as well, because when you have low voltage cable near high voltage, it gets exposed to EMI. So the metal divider provides EMI protection, and there has to be separation from low voltage from high voltage per the code book, right? So cannot remove it. It's got to be in there. And if the inspector does the final inspection and finds that that metal divider has been removed, they will make you replace it. Yes, they will make you replace it. Happens more than once. Had it happen before. So let's go on to the next question. Question number 5. Fire stopping. I haven't done any fire stopping questions in a while. It says, Chuck, what is this is coming from Art in Oklahoma. Art asks, what is the difference between a membrane and through penetration? Membrane and through penetration. Remember, we're talking about fire stopping here. So a membrane penetration means that you only go through one side of a fire barrier. You don't go through both sides. Let's use a wall as our example. Right? So a wall, you generally have two sides. Sometimes it's single gypsum board on each side. Sometimes it's double. Sometimes it's triple. Did one time there was actually 4 sheets of gypsum board on each side of it was actually a column. So membrane penetration means you only come through one side of the wall, and the cable goes down, and then it comes back out on the same side. Think of that MPLS or that cavity box that you're cutting out to put in. It's only penetrating one side of that wall. That's a membrane penetration. A through penetration means that it goes through both sides of that fire barrier, both sides. An easy example of a through penetration would be a fire stop sleeve. Most fire stop sleeves go through both sides of the wall. I say most because there's one made by Unique Fire Stop Systems, and I don't know if they would classify it as a sleeve or not, but it's got a square plate to it, and it's got a piece of a pipe at about a 45-degree angle, and it actually only penetrates the membrane because it's just for going in to go down the wall, and then you just put some fire stop in the front of that. I don't know if they call that a sleeve or not. They got a name for it, but I just don't remember what it is off the top of my head. So again, membrane only goes through one wall of the fire barrier. Through penetration goes through both sides. It goes all the way through the barrier. And it doesn't have to be a wall. It could be a floor, any architectural assembly as known. Question number 6. This question is from Eric in Ohio. I wonder if he's near you, Shotzi. He says, why in data centers does cable sometimes run overhead and other times it runs underneath the floor? Okay, so there's 2 main reasons why a customer will choose one over the other. And those 2 main reasons, not in any particular order, are aesthetics and price. Aesthetics and price. But there's advantages and disadvantages to both scenarios. So let's talk about overhead cabling first. That means running the cable in racks over top of the relay racks inside the data center. Right? So the first one is, now, number 2, the advantage is there's no decrease in airflow because it's above the cabinets, right? It actually doesn't block the airflow like an underfloor cabling would. The cables can, when you go do moves, adds, changes, it's easy to add cables to that because you just got Velcro and you do them to the straps or to the cable bundle, so it's easy to add stuff to it. And also, you use less cable. A lot of people don't realize that. You use less cable. And the reason you use less cable is because when you come out of that cable tray into that relay rack, our patch panels are generally mounted usually up high. Right? We usually put our patch panels up high and the heavier equipment towards the bottom. So your runs are actually going to be shorter. Less cable, less material cost. Less cable, less labor cost. So it's actually a little bit cheaper to do it that way. Now let's talk about the disadvantages of running overhead to ceiling. Right? So the biggest one is going to be potential EMI from the lights in the ceiling, especially if they're not LED lights, they're the older fluorescent lights with the ballast inside of them. Those things pump off a ton of EMI, and you got a cable tray literally just 6 to 12 inches away from that ceiling. If it runs underneath one of those lights, it's being exposed to EMI. That's a disadvantage about the overhead cabling. Another one, now it depends on who you talk to about this one. If you talk to a technician, I would say this is an advantage. But you talk to an IT person, they're going to say it's a disadvantage. And then what it is you can see the cables, right? And now what I mean by that is we as technicians, we love to cable comb our stuff, make it look nice and pretty in the cable trays. Not everybody, a lot of people do. But customers don't like looking at cables in the cable tray ceiling, in the cable tray just below the ceiling. They don't like looking at that. Someone just, I don't want to see it, I want to hide it. So that could be a disadvantage as well. Now, when you are also running above the ceiling, think about this. When you look at that ceiling in a data center, every once in a while you see fire sprinkler heads popping down through the ceiling. So that you could have an accident, accidentally knock one of those off and have an event which causes everything to get wet. It might block water flow to get to a potential fire or a root of a fire. So that's another disadvantage there. And because it's above the ceiling, I'm not above the ceiling, above the cable trays, above the relay racks, can't talk today, it's being exposed to more heat. Because remember, in our data centers, we like to do hot and cold aisle configurations, right? We want to get the hot air out of the cabinet, back to the Liebert system so we can cool it off and send that cold air back underneath the floor. So that hot air is rising. Now your cable's in that hot air. Now for my newer people who may not understand, cable attenuates more in higher temperatures. So if the higher the temperatures in, the less performance you're going to get out of that cable. The more signal loss you'll have in that cable. That's a disadvantage with running over the head. Underneath the floor, let's talk about the advantages, right? First one, it's easier to access the cables. You don't need a ladder. You literally just open up the floor tiles, right? If you're opening up floor tiles in an existing data center, secure your work area. Caution tape, cones, ladders, apprentices. Cover those holes up. Protect them. Also, never open up more than about 6 tiles at a time when working in an existing data center, because you will disrupt the air pressure in that system. That could cause equipment to overheat, right? When the cable's underneath, it also allows for easier moves, adds, changes, because you open up the floor tiles, you just drop the cables in the tray. A lot of times when you see the cables in the tray underneath the floor, generally, I'm going to say generally, not always, because I've seen pictures where they've done this, but generally, most people don't dress those cables because they're hidden. They're underneath the floor. They're not visible. That's also an advantage by the customer. If the same customer earlier didn't want to see the cables in the ceiling because it's underneath the floor, that way they don't have to see it. All they see is just their beautiful racks and all the green lights flashing on them. Now let's talk about some of the disadvantages to running underneath the floor in a data center. We were talking about the hot air, cold air delivery system. So that Liebert system pushes that cold air underneath the floor, and it actually pressurizes underneath the floor. It's looking for some place to go. Now, there's usually a perforated tile either right in front of the cabinet. Old school, you might find an older data center where they actually cut out holes in the middle of the cabinet. So the air would come up and push that hot air out. If you got big data center with big cable trays and big cable bundles, you could obstruct airflow. Absolutely could obstruct airflow. And that could cost money. Could cause a piece of equipment to overheat. There's a rule called the half-life rule. The half-life rule says for every 10 degrees above ambient temperature that a piece of equipment gets exposed to, its life expectancy is reduced by half. So if that equipment gets overheated because there's cable underneath the floor, their equipment might not last as long. The average IT equipment lasts 3 to 5 years. And if you got under cable floor system and you got a whole bunch of cable, that might only last a year or two now. So they're having to replace equipment more often, but they're not associating it because of the heat and the cable underneath the floor. That's another disadvantage. And another disadvantage of underfloor cable system is you got to install a raised cable system or raised floor inside of a data center, and that costs money. The stanchions and the raised floor tiles, those things aren't cheap. They are not cheap. And this is a personal one here. When cables are underneath the floor, it allows for them to be done disorganized. I did a project once for a really large law firm in Washington, D.C. called Jones, Day, Reeves, and Pogue. I think they've changed names since the last time I've done work there, but their data center floor, when you open a tile, there were so many cables jammed in, going so many different directions. You couldn't, if you stuck your head in the floor, you couldn't see more than about 2 feet. And that was just a pain to run cable. And it was also a potential failure because if you were running a fish tape through there and it caught something, you could actually disconnect a piece of equipment. So when you're doing cabling inside of data centers, you also can do what's called end of row configuration or center of row configuration, right? So what do they mean by that? So end of row configuration means that the HDA is on the end of the row. So they run the backbone to that HDA, and then they run cables from that HDA to each of those cabinets in that row. The central row configuration, you put the HDA in the center, and because it's in the center, you use less cable. Less cable, less material cost, less cable, less labor cost. So those are the main reasons why people would choose one over the other, if as far as whether running the cable overhead or underneath, right? So let's see if we have any questions. Okay, what wave division multiplier? Maybe so. What does it say here? What is wave division multiplexing, and what's the benefit from multi-mode fiber? That's a great question, Michael, and I'm already at my 30-minute mark now. I will answer that question on next Thursday night's after hours live stream, if that's okay with you, because that's about a 10-minute conversation, right? And I want to make sure I give you the full info on that. So make sure you attend next Thursday night, okay? Any other questions from anybody else? Any quick ones? No? Yes, no? Okay. Until next Thursday night, everybody, I'll see you then. Be safe. And I'll see you on the new platform, no longer StreamYard. Take care, everybody.